was born 7 years after the Prophet Muhammad, around 575 CE. He was one of the Prophet's very first followers. Ben often was known for his humility. Some even called him shy. And for his intelligence. He could read and write in the 500 CE, an exclusive skill. Using those gifts, he became a successful businessman in what is now Saudi Arabia. Somewhat like our part of Arizona, Saudi Arabia is a very dry part of the world, relying on monsoon rains to replenish water stores each year. As the story goes, and maybe you read it in this month's Touchstones Journal, in the year 640 there was no monsoon season. The expected annual rains never came, and there was terrible drought. Without any rain, food crops withered. There were no figs on the fig trees, no olives on the olive branches. Things got so bad that people had to eat the leaves from the trees in order to survive. You can imagine how happy the people were the day they learned that a caravan of 1,000 camels, each laden with mounds of food, was approaching Medina. People began to imagine the smells that would fill their kitchen as they were cooking their favorite meals. Best of all, they imagined going to bed with full stomachs for the first time in weeks. Knowing that the caravan belonged to Uthman bin Affan made the people even happier because they knew his reputation for generosity. No doubt he would give them a good price for the food he had for sale. The people couldn't have been more thrilled that it was he who was coming. Now, the merchants were also happy to hear that the caravan was approaching. For months, business had been slow or nil because they had no food to sell. They began to imagine their shops filled with hungry people looking to buy things, but knowing that the caravan belonged to bin Affan was not welcome news for the merchants because he had a reputation for being a sharp businessman. He was fair, but he drove a hard bargain. Still, when his caravan came into sight, the merchants ran to it and started to talk to him. How much did he want for the food? How could it be evenly divided among the merchants? How quickly could they get the product into their booths? Ben Affan received all the merchants graciously. No one was surprised when he rejected their first offers. "I'm afraid I can't do business with you," he said, "for I've already received a better offer." This was just how shrewd business people operated. The merchants raised their offers again and again, but each time Uthman declined, saying the same thing every time: "I'm afraid I can't do business with you, for I've already received a better offer." The merchants began to grumble among themselves. By refusing the prices they offered, he was driving the price of food higher and higher. Some of the citizens of Medina might not even be able to afford it at all. Finally, the merchants made their best offer, 5 times the value of the cargo. Surely Uthman would accept now. Who could possibly have offered more? You know by now, though, what he replied. At least you know how he began. "I'm sorry," he said, "I cannot do business with you, for I have received a better offer from Allah. For Allah has said that anyone who gives away wealth in Allah's name will get back far more than he gives away." So it was that Uthman bin Affan gave away all the food carried by 1,000 camels in his caravan for the starving people of Medina. Now, if you're like me, you're wondering, what about the business owners? I mean, they have to make a living, right? Sure. But I lovingly invite us to stifle that line of thought for now. Think instead of an ancient village. The entire town is in crisis, and rather than treating some members of the town as a special class that might be able to make some money off the crisis, Uthman makes sure that every person, including the business owners, has enough to get through tough times. This kind of open-heartedness feels like a miracle when we come across it. When a person does something she doesn't have to do to help in tough times, it can be life-changing beyond the food or money or service that's offered. This is our calling as people of faith, to use the resources at our disposal to improve others' lives and the world, to embody the spirit of people like bin Affan, This is the reason we tell these stories. But how do we sustain that type of generous spirit? These days, the problems we're often working on are daunting. Climate change, the very existence of the human race may be in question. And we know now that we can change all our light bulbs and drive a Prius, and still, unless our leaders act in concert with each other, we can't solve the problem. Even then, the damage we've already done is in some ways irreparable. And racism. I was in a class with a professor who marched with Dr. King in Selma in 1965. He was getting ready to retire, and he was speaking to a group of brand new or hoping soon to be ministers. He said to us, "I spent my career pushing down racism in one area, but I see now that you'll spend your careers pushing it down in another area. It will always be with us in some form or another." And one more thing. Some of us are so busy just keeping our heads above water that although we feel passionate about many things, saving the environment, helping the homeless, we're working like mad just to pay the bills and take care of the people we love. Maybe we sometimes feel guilty for not doing enough. Liberal religion can be quite guilt-inducing that way. So I stand up here and I call us to work together on tough issues. And I believe with all my mind and heart that these issues will get better with our hard work. But they will not disappear in our lifetimes. There will not be one caravan of camels that solves the problems on which we are called to work. What is required, I think, is the slow drip, drip, drip of justice work, which, like water on stone, slowly changes the shape of the rocks of hatred. How do we maintain the hope, the persistent, open-hearted generosity that is required for this work, especially in the face of hate and anger and greed? It's an old question. In the Christian Bible, the evangelist and church planter that we call the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to one of the congregations that he started, and that letter has been preserved as the letter of the Apostle Paul to the Galatians. The members of the Galatian congregation were going through some turmoil. It seems some believed that new followers of Jesus who weren't Jewish needed to be circumcised and become full-fledged Jewish converts to be true Jesus followers. And others thought following the teachings of Jesus was enough without that. Paul had his own perspective, and he helped influence the split of Christianity off as its own religion. That's what most of the letter was about. And though that's interesting to me, it isn't what sticks out when I read this letter as a minister. What I see just beneath the surface is a congregation of people who are bruised. They were struggling with their faith. These were idealistic people who were probably attracted to the message of their faith because they believed in these teachings of love and peace and inclusion of the outcast. And now they were finding it wasn't going to be as easy to enact those teachings as they might have hoped. There were political questions to wrestle through. And some of them were beleaguered and exhausted. Now, I can't say that I love the Apostle Paul and all his teachings. I do think his teaching has been abused. It's a sermon for another day. But in this particular letter, he reveals what I would call a minister's heart. At the very end, he writes this to the congregation he loves. So let us not allow ourselves to get fatigued doing good. At the right time, we'll harvest a good crop if we don't give up or quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get the chance, he said, let us work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith. Let us not be fatigued in doing good. Paul was on to something, I think, fatigued in doing good. I think in this constant information age, we're always in danger of suffering what some people call compassion fatigue. I came across the notion when I worked in a Trauma 1 emergency room for a while, but I don't think you have to be dealing directly with dying patients to suffer. I think compassion fatigue can happen in any organization that has the goal of making the world a better place. Anybody who works on another's behalf, including for racial justice or alleviation of poverty and homelessness, things we work on here, can experience this. Following is from an expert on the subject. This quote talks about caregivers, but I think folks who are working for love and justice in the world qualify. They write, studies confirm that caregivers play host to a high level of compassion fatigue. Day in, day out, workers struggle to function in caregiving environments that constantly present heart-wrenching emotional challenges. Affecting positive change in society, a mission so vital to those passionate about caring for others, is perceived as elusive, if not impossible. This painful reality, coupled with firsthand knowledge of society's flagrant disregard for the safety and well-being of the feeble and frail, takes its toll. Eventually, negative attitudes prevail. This kind of fatigue in doing good results in negative attitudes. And eventually, it results in the organization, a congregation in our case, not being able to fulfill its mission. And at that point, look where we are. We've tried so hard to work for justice that we've burned ourselves out, and justice isn't being served anyway. So let me say something to the congregation I love. I am blessed every day to see so many of you doing so much good in the world. My Facebook feed, for one, is full of those sorts of things. Some of it's through the congregation. Some of you are doing this good as individuals. All of it is amazing. You're changing the world. But I think some of us are going and going and going, and I think sometimes we get tired and frustrated. I think that because I feel the same pressures. Politicians and their wranglings tempt us to lose hope in progress. We can get down on the people around us, and maybe we're tempted to despair, to become fatigued in doing good, to yield to it. Of course we're tempted. When we start feeling that way, our hearts can begin to close up to protect themselves, and before we know it, we're angry and frustrated, and we're tempted to throw up our hands. I hope I'm not the only person who's ever felt this way. The world, though, and our families and our congregation need us to be in this for the long haul, not just flashes in the pan. Dr. Eric Gentry, a psychotherapist who is an expert on compassion fatigue, says he believes, quote, that people who are attracted to caregiving often enter the field already compassion fatigued. A strong identification with the helpless, suffering, or traumatized people is possibly the motive. It's common for such people to hail from a tradition of what Gentry labels other-directed caregiving. Simply put, he says, these are people who were taught at an early age to care for the needs of others before caring for their own needs. Authentic, ongoing self-care practices are absent from their lives, end quote. That is what we can change. Like Ben often in the story, we can be bearers of gifts which make the world a better place. But to sustain that open-heartedness, I think we have to be centered and grounded in something beyond ourselves. What is it that keeps your heart open? Poetry? Music? Is it family? Maybe it's silence. Are you making sure you're in touch with whatever it is? Is your life balanced with meaning-making work for social justice and battery-charging activities? The work we do, the path we're on, is a long one. So let us remember that even as the fire of commitment to a better world drives us on, that's a flame that needs tending. May we do that work for ourselves and with one another. Amen.